In 1969, Apollo 11 was the first spacecraft to land on the moon. On that ship was Neil Armstrong. When taking the first step out of the ship, he said the famous quote, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
Let's take a step away from the troubles of the 60s and leap into the 70s with Nixon. Richard Nixon was the Republican president from 1969 to 1974. He was supported by the silent majority, who were the people that were not the protesters. Some of the main problems he faced were inflation and unemployment and high oil prices. Nixon made prices freeze to try to curb inflation and reduce unemployment.
Because of high oil prices, there was an energy crisis. The U.S. was becoming more dependent on foreign nations. As a result, OPEC, which stands for Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, was formed by the four nations that quadrupled the price of oil. When the Arab countries broke out in a war, they cut off the U.S. supply of oil. The cutoff of oil forced the U.S. to create a pipeline that went from Alaska to other states in the U.S. These harsh oil cuts made the winter of 1973 and 1974 particularly cruel because of lack of heat.
To add to all of the oil problems already there was an oil spill. This caused different programs to be made, like the Environmental Protection Agency, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Clean Air Act, and the Water Quality Improvement Act. These programs helped with the cleanup and the further protection for the environment. Earth Day was also created to make people more aware and help them want a cleaner Earth.
To keep the Earth cleaner and to lessen dependency on oil, nuclear power plants were created. In other parts of the world, the U.S. was trying to come together with the Chinese and Soviets to promote peace. Nixon visited China to ease tensions. With the Soviets created SALT, which was an agreement to limit unconditional nuclear missiles, and détente was created to lessen military equipment.
After all Nixon had accomplished, he wanted to run again for president. But Watergate happened. Watergate was a scandal where Nixon sent plumbers who were former government officials ordered to stop leaks and carry out a variety of illegal actions to protect the government. These plumbers snuck into the Watergate building in Washington, D.C. to try to sabotage Democratic chances of winning.
It was discovered that these men had ties to Nixon and the White House, and they were being paid by Nixon's campaign organization, CREEP funds. Nixon's administration denied all links to the break-in at the Watergate building. There was a huge investigation into the Watergate scandal, and many people went to jail. Nixon continued to deny charges. Then someone came forward and said Nixon had secretly taped his conversations in the White House. Congress tried to force Nixon to hand forward the tapes, and eventually he did, but not all of them. He handed over only the non-important tapes.
The Saturday Night Massacre was the result of Nixon refusing to turn over the rest of the tapes. He tried to get his attorney general and his deputy attorney to fire the special prosecutor, but they both resigned rather than obeying. The public was infuriated and wanted the president impeached. Congress had threatened charges of impeachment, and the president realized he was going to lose, so he resigned.
The 38th President of the United States was Gerald Ford. He was well respected until he pardoned Nixon, then his popularity plummeted. Ford also had trouble with Congress because it was a Democratic majority and he was a Republican. Then ran and beat Reagan in Republican race to run against Carter, the Democrat.
Carter won this election, becoming the 39th president. He soon lost popularity because he was lenient on the punishment of those who fled the draft during the war. His first task was to stimulate the economy by corporate tax cuts. Then he tried to reduce unemployment, but that spiked inflation. To reduce the inflation, he called for voluntary wages and price controls. However, this increased unemployment, making Carter's economic policies very unsuccessful.
Carter's next big thing was the energy crisis. He created the Department of Energy. Then the next year they passed National Energy Act to control the price of natural gas. The Iran War broke out around this time, and oil prices increased by 50%.
The Panama Canal treaties were also passed during Carter's presidency. These treaties were to give complete control of canal over to Panama by the year 2000, but in return, Panama has to safeguard the U.S. security interests. He also helped Egypt and Israel come up with peace accords.
During Carter's presidency, human rights played a big role in society. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was passed, making it where jobs, education, and housing couldn't discriminate because of physical disabilities. The Handicapped Children Act was passed, forcing schools to provide an education to kids with disabilities. These were both a result of the state laws passed for handicapped people. Schools and businesses are also a part of the Affirmative Action Program, giving women and minority groups preference over men.
Stepping away from the economical and political side of the 70s, we go to the cultural side. In the 70s, it was all about mood rings, lava lamps, smiley faces, and Rubik's Cubes. For clothing, bell-bottoms, hip huggers, colorful patches, platform shoes, clogs, t-shirts, and gypsy dresses were popular. In technology, there was the floppy disk, and Intel introduced the microprocessor. Apollo 17 was the last manned craft to the moon. Jumbo jets, VCRs, neutron bombs, MRI technology, laser printers, barcode scanners, and test tube babies were all the newest technological advances.
In music, there were many new types of rock and many rock legends, such as Aerosmith, the Eagles, Elton John, Led Zeppelin, The Who, Bob Marley, and Michael Jackson. For movies, there was the hit film Star Wars, along with Sylvester Stallone's Rocky, The Godfather, Jaws, and Grease. These movies made going to the theater more popular again. Lastly, in TV, Saturday Night Live made its first debut along with Happy Days, The Brady Bunch, and Sesame Street. Also on television were broadcasts of the Senate Watergate hearings.
These things, both good and bad, were a giant leap for the U.S. that all started with a small step for one man thousands of miles away from Earth. This era was called the 70s.